Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to embroider the petal stitch. Now the petal stitch is a very untraditional stitch. It's actually comprised of 2 stitches and then a bunch of loops. It's very textured, very raised and dimensional, and you can alter it quite easily. It makes great petals, as it was named for a flower, but it can also make other elements as well. It can make a little ring. You can make it into a wreath. There are lots of things you can do. This stitch uses a lot of embroidery floss. In most cases, you'll want a number of strands, 4 or more. I like to use 6 for the most part, but again, that will vary by the project and your style. It'll use quite a bit of floss because you stitch the first stitch, then you add your loops, and you add your loops, and you add your loops, and then you add another stitch. So let's get started so I can show you what I mean and exactly how I use this in my work. So here's the petal stitch. I used it both for the petals of the flower and the leaves. It's just an interesting stitch. Now I wanted to show you that you can really do a lot of things with this. You can pull up the stitch. It's kind of a little bit mobile. It's tacked down at the top and the bottom, and then it's just wound around. And I have a pin here just to lift that up to show you, but I have a pin to show you exactly how to do the stitch. So let's get started on that. So here are some petal stitches. Just did them in different colors of the rainbow. I used 6 strands of embroidery floss to make all of them, but I wound them a different number of times. This is wound 4 times, the red here, but the rest are wound 5 times. And you can see that you get a different effect. You can also pull it flat, like it is here on the yellow, or make it more like it is on the green here, just like a little ring. And if you don't really do anything to it, it's not as organized as this. But you see here, you get a lot of texture and dimension on your petal stitches. So now to create another petal stitch here that I'm going to show you, I purposely want to do it approximately the same size as these stitches because I think it's really helpful to use the petal stitch in a grouping, whether it's leaves or petals, and you kind of want to control the size of the stitch. Now you can make this stitch any size and you can wrap your thread any number of times. But to make it approximately this size, I have a little dash here, and this is the dash that starts all of my petal stitches. And so all I do is create a stitch here. I come up from one side of that dash and make a straight stitch down the other. So that's the base of my petal stitch. And then I pull that snug. For the top of my petal stitch though, where it ends, I'm not going to stitch it down just yet. I want to make my loopings. So I want the top of it to be approximately this height. So I'm going to stick a pin in that height and have it come out underneath my stitch. So from here, I'm going to take my thread and come up very close to the top of that single stitch that I made. So I'll pull up my thread, and now I'm not going to do any more stitching just yet. I'm just going to do wrapping. So I take my thread and I wrap it around that pin head, just beneath that pin head, and then I come here to that area where I stitched that initial stitch, and I bring my thread through. I'm not going through any fabric at this point. And these are the loops that I make. You can do any number of loops that you want. You want to pull it snug, but not too tight. I like it to lay flush, kind of like in the yellow. That's my preferred method, or the red. And so I have 2 wraps now. I'll do 3. And depending on the item you're making, 3 or 4 wraps usually does it, but you certainly can make more or less. And now to finish it off, I'm going to wrap it around the top of the pin here, and I'll set this down. Then I like to use my finger to hold all my loops in place, and I gently pull out my pin. And now I'm done with the pin on this particular petal. I'm going to come in here and just straighten out my loops, and then very carefully I'm going to take my needle and bring it under my loops, still not going through the fabric. I bring it about halfway through, and then I take that extra thread around my needle and I make a figure 8. I bring it underneath and then over towards me, and I'll gently pull that thread. Now I don't pull it taut yet. I want to just kind of adjust it to exactly where I want it to go. I can play with the strands, and then when I'm happy with it, I can just pull that snug and it catches it. And then from there, I'll just adjust one more time finally and bring my needle down into my fabric. And that holds my little petal stitch into place. And from here, I'll just knot it on the back. And I snip it, just like I did with all of the petals of the different colors. So there I have my petal stitch, just single versions in different colors. And then here I have one how I use it in my work. It's just a sweet little stitch. I made 3 petal stitches, 1 large and 2 smaller, but you can do all the way around, kind of making petals of a daisy. Or you can use it in interesting ways. There's lots of ways you can do it. It adds a completely different texture, kind of like a satin stitch, but not quite. So it's very interesting. It gives you area that you can fill in here as well. If you wanted to do maybe another stitch or fill it with French knots, you have a lot of choices with this stitch. I think you'll find it useful in your work. It's a very simple and fun stitch. So that's the petal stitch. It's a very untraditional stitch to use in your embroidery, but it's very interesting. It adds dimension. It really adds a pop of color. And I'm really curious how this would look with variegated thread as well. I really like the idea of using loops and putting a lot of thread on the outside of your piece, the piece that shows, instead of just going through the fabric over and over again. It just adds a little variety to your work. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you're interested in additional videos, consider becoming a member of my channel. I have member-only videos, behind-the-scene posts, and videos as well. Each month I'll add new videos, so there'll be a library that will form, and members have access to that library only. So please consider becoming a member. And thank you for joining me today.